was standing in the lobby of Harlow Gardens, the venue Daniel and I had chosen after visiting 11 different places, when our wedding coordinator, Priscilla, walked toward us with a face the color of chalk. She pulled me aside, away from the front desk, away from the couple behind us waiting to finalize their booking. She kept her voice very low, the way people do when they're embarrassed to deliver news that isn't their fault. "Miss Carter," she said, "the payment for your reservation was reversed this morning. 2 hours ago." I blinked. Reversed. The card on file. The funds were pulled back. Daniel put his hand on my arm. I turned around and there was my mother, Diane Carter, standing near the door with her handbag over her shoulder and a calm expression on her face. Calm like she'd planned this. Calm like she'd driven here just to watch. My father, Richard, stood one step behind her, arms folded. "It's time you learned about consequences, Emily," he said. I stood in that beautiful lobby, 6 weeks before my wedding day, and understood that my parents had not made a mistake. They had made a choice. Deliberate, calculated, and cruel. And they had done it in public on purpose. We drove home in silence. My thoughts stopped making sentences. Everything went flat while Daniel kept his eyes on the road and didn't push me to talk. Back at our apartment, I sat on the kitchen floor because the chairs felt too far away. Daniel sat beside me on the tile and said nothing for a long time. When I finally looked up, he handed me a glass of water. "Tell me what happened," he said. So I told him what I already knew but hadn't wanted to say out loud. 3 weeks earlier, my younger brother Tyler had called me in a panic. He owed $35,000 to people he should never have borrowed from. Gambling debts. He'd been hiding them for over a year, stacking bad decisions until the pile was too heavy to carry. He needed the money fast. He needed it from me. I said no. I had savings. I had worked hard for those savings. And I was not going to drain my account to clean up a mess Tyler had made with his eyes wide open. My parents did not see it that way. In their version, I had abandoned family when family needed me most. So they canceled the wedding fund. That was their answer. That was what I was worth to them. The wedding fund wasn't something I had ever asked for. My parents brought it up themselves when I was 16. My father sat me down at the dining table one Sunday afternoon and said that when the time came, they would take care of my wedding. All of it. I believed him. He said it like a promise. What I didn't understand then was that money in my family was never just money. It was a leash. Every time my parents offered to pay for something, a version of control came attached that didn't show itself until much later. When I started college, they chose the school. Not by forbidding other applications. They simply made clear that only one school came with their financial support. So I attended the school they picked. When I needed a car at 22, my father helped with the payments. 6 months later, he arrived unannounced to inspect who I was spending time with. Every dollar came with invisible strings. For a long time I kept accepting the money because I told myself the strings weren't that tight. The wedding fund was the last string. The thickest one. And only now, standing in the ruins of what had cost me, did I finally understand what it had always really been. Daniel had never liked the arrangement. He told me exactly once, very clearly, about 2 months after I introduced him to my parents. We were walking home from dinner when he stopped on the sidewalk and turned to face me. "I need to say something, and I need you to hear it without getting defensive." I told him I was listening. "Your parents' money is not a gift. It's a control system. Every time they pay for something, they collect the right to have a say in it. The wedding fund isn't generosity, Emily. It's a down payment on ownership." I got defensive anyway. I told him he didn't know them the way I did. We didn't fight. But the conversation ended in that particular silence that means someone has said a true thing, and the other person isn't ready to accept it. Sitting on the kitchen floor now, I looked at Daniel across the tile and thought about that night. "You were right," I said. He didn't say I told you so. He didn't look satisfied. He looked tired, and genuinely sorry that he'd been right at all. "We still need a plan," he said. I nodded. But I didn't have one yet. I was still standing at the edge of something I didn't know how to cross. The next morning my phone buzzed before I was fully awake. I saw my mother's name on the screen. I let it ring. It buzzed again immediately. I let that one ring too. Then a text arrived. I read it once, then set the phone face down on the mattress, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. It said, "You know what needs to happen. Apologize to us and to Tyler. Give him what he needs. Tell the family you acted selfishly, and that you understand that now. Do all of this, and we'll restore the payment. Don't, and there is no wedding. Your choice." I read it again. What my mother called a choice wasn't a choice. It was an ultimatum dressed in calm language to sound reasonable. She wanted 3 things: my public humiliation, my money, and my silence about what they had done, all packaged as conditions for getting my own wedding back. I put the phone in my dresser drawer and went to make coffee. Daniel was already in the kitchen. I handed him the phone without a word. He read it. His jaw tightened. "This isn't about Tyler," he said. "This is about whether you still belong to them." That was exactly what it was. He had named it perfectly. Tyler called that evening. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me answer, some part of me that still hoped he might say something honest. He didn't start with an apology. He started with a laugh that sounded nervous and too loud and slightly drunk. You know I didn't ask them to do this." "Then why are you calling, Tyler?" There was a pause. When he spoke again, the fake lightness was gone. "The 35, he said. "It's not 35 anymore." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I mean it was 35 when I called you last month. Interest. Late fees. These people don't wait, Emily. It's closer to 52 now. And Mom and Dad," he stopped. "They're scared. Like, genuinely scared." "Of what?" "Of the people I owe." There it was. Tyler hadn't just made bad bets. He'd borrowed from people who don't send polite letters when payments are overdue. My parents weren't just angry with me for saying no. They were desperate. They were using the wedding fund as leverage because they had nothing else left. I was never their daughter in this plan. I was their last exit. And finally understanding that changed something in me that wouldn't change back. I found out about the rumors from my cousin Brianna, who texted me a screenshot of a message her mother had received from mine. The message described me as financially reckless and said I had essentially destroyed my own wedding through poor planning and selfishness. It said my parents had tried to help but that I had refused to cooperate. Every word was a lie carefully shaped to sound like a sad truth. Within 48 hours, at least 6 relatives had heard some version of this story. I knew because people started reaching out with that particular tone. The one that mixes concern with judgment, where they ask how you're doing but already believe the answer. My cousin Marcus called and said, very gently, "Emily, I just want to understand what happened with the venue." My Aunt Carol sent an actual paper card saying she hoped Daniel and I could work through our challenges and find a way to include the whole family in our healing. Our healing. As though I had wounded someone. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't called anyone. I hadn't defended myself to a single person. And still the story was moving through my family like smoke through a building, quiet and suffocating, with every version making me the one who had caused the fire. Aunt Sandra was my father's sister, the quiet kind, someone who observed more than she spoke. She called me on a Tuesday evening and said, "I'm not calling to take sides. I'm calling because what your mother is doing isn't right, and you deserve to know you're not imagining it." I sat down. Sandra told me my mother had been making calls all week, framing the same story each time. That I had become difficult, that my values had shifted since I met Daniel, that I was unstable in ways that worried the family. She used that exact word, Sandra said. Unstable. I didn't say anything. I just held the phone and waited. "This isn't the first time your mother has done something like this," Sandra said. She paused for a moment, like she was deciding how far to go. "There are things I've never told you because I didn't think it was my place," she continued. "But I think it's my place now." I told her I had all the time she needed. She took a slow breath, and then she began telling me the story I had never been meant to hear. The one that explained, finally and completely, that what was happening to me had a name, and that my mother had practiced it before. Sandra told me the story carefully, the way you tell something you've carried a long time. Years ago, her daughter Nora had started a small catering business. Talented, organized, with a real plan. She needed a loan to get the kitchen licensed and equipment purchased. She applied at a bank and was approved, pending a co-signature from a family member with solid credit. My mother volunteered. Nora was grateful. Everything looked set. Then Nora disagreed with my mother about something small, a family gathering, a seating arrangement. Nothing that should have mattered. 2 days before the loan closed, my mother called the bank and withdrew her co-signature. No warning. No conversation. One phone call, and Nora's business died before it opened. Your mother told everyone Nora had decided not to move forward, Sandra said. She controlled the story then too. I pressed my hand flat on the kitchen table and stared at the wood grain. Why didn't anyone say anything? Because she made us feel like the problem was Nora. She's very good at that, Emily. Making the person she's hurting look like the one causing trouble. I knew. I had lived inside that pattern my whole life without seeing its full shape. Now I could. All of it. And it would never be invisible to me again. That night Daniel and I sat at the table for a long time without talking much. I told him everything Sandra had said. He listened and went quiet, staring at his hands. I think we should cancel the whole thing, I said. He looked up. Not the wedding. I mean scale it down completely. Something small at the courthouse. Dinner after with people who actually care. I'm exhausted, Daniel. I don't want to spend 6 more weeks fighting for a party. He nodded slowly, then shook his head. If that's truly what you want, I'll do it tomorrow. But I don't want us to make that choice because they've pushed us into a corner. That's still them winning. Then what do we do? He didn't have an answer. We just sat with the problem between us like a locked door we couldn't find the key for. Outside, a car passed slowly, headlights sweeping across the ceiling. A dog barked somewhere down the street. I put my head on Daniel's shoulder. He put his arm around me. We didn't figure anything out that night. But we didn't give up either. Something about that felt important, staying the question together rather than running from it alone. The next afternoon, Daniel suggested we get out of the apartment. We walked 6 blocks to a small cafe called Orchard and Vine. Mismatched chairs, hand-lettered menus, older regulars nursing the same cup for hours. We ordered coffee, split a slice of lemon cake, and talked about nothing important for a while. The first conversation in days that didn't feel like a strategy session. I didn't notice the woman at the table beside us at first. She was older, maybe mid-70s, with silver hair pinned back neatly. A cup of tea she hadn't touched. A book she had stopped reading. I started to cry without meaning to. Quietly, hand pressed over my mouth, telling Daniel I was tired of feeling like a piece in someone else's game. When I stopped, the woman set her book down. She didn't make a production of it. She simply turned toward us and spoke in a calm, clear voice. "Forgive me for listening," she said. I didn't mean to, and then I couldn't stop. She looked at me directly. "How much do you still need?" I thought she was being polite, making a kind gesture. I gave a small smile and said we would figure it out. She didn't smile back. "I'm not asking to be kind," she said. "I need to know the number." Daniel went still beside me. I looked at this woman properly for the first time. She wore simple clothes. Nothing expensive looking, but she held herself with the quiet steadiness that doesn't come from money. It comes from making a lot of decisions over a long life and standing behind every one. "The venue deposit is $8,400, I said. I wasn't sure why I answered. Something in her voice made it feel safe. "The remaining vendors are another $14,000. Catering, flowers, the photographer. We had half covered ourselves. The portion my parents promised was just under $12,000. She nodded once. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a small leather card case, and slid a card across the table. "Call me tomorrow," she said. "I mean it." Then she picked up her tea, took one sip, and went back to her book as though none of it had happened. The card said, Eleanor Brooks. I stared at it. Daniel reached over and picked it up slowly. Something moved across his face, a recognition, a hesitation, something careful. "Emily," he said quietly. "That's my grandmother." I stared at him. "I haven't seen her in almost 2 years," he said. "We had a falling out over something I should have fixed long before now." "Your grandmother just offered to pay for our wedding," I said. "I know. Did you know she—" "I didn't know she came to this cafe." He turned the card over in his hands. "But yes, I know who she is." He set the card down and told me the rest. Eleanor Brooks had built a hotel business from one small property into a chain of 14 across the southeast. She had sold it 12 years ago. She lived quietly, dressed simply, never made her wealth obvious. But she was genuinely, substantially wealthy, and she had never once spent money carelessly. "She's fiercely protective of people she loves," Daniel said. "And she has a very sharp sense of when someone is being wronged." I looked at the card again. Why would she do this for us? Daniel was quiet for a moment. Because she was listening. And I think what she heard made her angry in a way that made her want to act. He paused. "She's always believed that people who use money to control others are the worst kind of bully. She has very little patience for it." He looked at me. "She means it, Emily. When Eleanor says she'll do something, she does it." I called Eleanor the next morning. She answered on the second ring, like she'd been expecting it. We talked for almost an hour. She asked about how Daniel and I met, about my work, about what I wanted my life to look like in 10 years. She was warm but not soft. She listened the way someone listens when they're genuinely deciding something. Near the end of the call she said, "I'll cover the full remaining amount. Not as a loan. Not as charity. A wedding gift from someone who should have been invited much sooner. I started to thank her, and she stopped me. There's one thing I'll say, and it's not a condition on the money. The money is yours regardless. But stop giving people the power to decide your worth. Not just your parents. Anyone who treats your life like it belongs to them. She said it gently but firmly, like someone planting something meant to stick. Your fiancé's heart is good, she added. I watched him in that cafe. He didn't try to fix anything. He just stayed. That's the kind of person worth building a life with. Before she hung up, she said, I'd like to come to the wedding, if you'll have me. I told her there was absolutely no question about that. That evening, Daniel and I sat down with the guest list. It had started as 140 people, a number that had grown over 2 years of additions and obligations, half included because saying no felt impolite. We started from the top. My parents came off first. It took less time than I expected. I wrote their names on a separate piece of paper, drew a line through them, and felt something unlock in my chest. Tyler came off next. Then 3 relatives who had echoed my mother's version of events without ever asking for mine. Then 2 family friends who were really my parents' friends, people who had never once called just to ask how I was doing. When we finished, the list had 61 names. Every single person on it was someone I could call right now, in a genuine crisis, and know they would pick up. Daniel looked at the new list for a long time. This is the right room, he said. I folded the piece of paper with my parents' names on it, and put it in the recycling. Not because I was pretending they didn't exist. Because I was done organizing my life around managing their feelings. That was the first night in 2 weeks I slept straight through until morning. My mother called at 7:42 in the morning, 2 days after we'd quietly updated the venue's guest list. I know the exact time because I looked at the screen and thought, she's up early. That means something has happened. I answered. Emily. Her voice had that controlled edge. Furious underneath. Calm on top. I've been informed that we're no longer on the guest list. That's correct. Silence. Then, do you understand what you're doing to this family? I understand it very well. You are humiliating us. In front of people we've known for 30 years. You cancel my venue payment to force my hand, I said, keeping my voice level. You spread a false story to relatives to damage my reputation. And long before all of that, you spent my entire life using money to control who I was. I'm not angry with you. I'm just done. She said, you will regret this. I told her I hoped she had a good morning. Then I hung up and sat with my coffee until my hands stopped shaking. Outside, the street was quiet. Pigeons walked along the window ledge. Ordinary things, continuing completely indifferent to what had just happened. That helped. My father called that afternoon. He skipped hello entirely. I want you to know, he said, that if you proceed with this, I will be revising my will. You should be aware of the financial implications of the choices you're making. I almost said something sharp. Instead, I waited 1 beat. Then 2. And then something happened that I hadn't expected. I laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a nervous one. A real, surprised laugh, because here was my father, playing the final piece of leverage he thought he had, and it meant absolutely nothing to me. Dad, I said, once I'd settled. I've never planned my life around your will. I'm not going to start now. He didn't know what to do with that. He'd expected tears or anger or bargaining. He got laughter, and it clearly confused him. Emily, I have to go, I said. I have calls to make. I hung up. I sat for a moment and took stock of what I felt. No guilt. No panic. No urge to call back and soften things. Just a clean, quiet space where the fear used to live. The inheritance threat was the last card they had. They'd played it. And I hadn't flinched. That told me everything I needed to know about how much had changed. 3 days before the wedding, my Aunt Carol called to tell me about a group message. I wasn't in the thread, but Carol read me enough to understand. My mother had written to 11 relatives asking them to skip the wedding as a show of family solidarity. She'd framed it as concern. Said she didn't want to pressure anyone, only to share that she and Richard were heartbroken and that attending would send a message she hoped the family wouldn't want to send. She had suggested that relatives who did come were choosing my stubbornness over family unity. I listened without interrupting. Then Carol said, I want you to know I replied to the thread and told your mother I would be at your wedding. 3 other people said the same within the hour. 2 more followed after that. I closed my eyes for a second. Thank you, Carol. Your mother isn't always wrong, she said carefully. But she is very wrong here. And some of us can see it. Later that evening, Brianna texted me one screenshot. just one line from a cousin I hadn't expected to speak. It read, "I've heard Emily's side. I'm going." I read it 4 times. Sometimes the smallest things land the hardest. Brianna also sent screenshots from a second thread, a smaller one my mother hadn't realized could be seen. In it, my mother coordinated language. She told my Aunt Karen exactly which phrases to use when speaking to mutual friends. She suggested Karen mention I had always been difficult with money, a complete fabrication, and that Daniel had isolated me from good judgment. Every word was a prepared script, distributed like a press release. I read through it twice. I wasn't shocked. What I felt was colder and more useful. Clarity. This wasn't hurt mother reacting. This was a practiced method. She had done it before. To Nora. To Sandra. Probably to others I'd never know. I saved the screenshots. Not to post them. Not to send them to anyone. Just to keep them. The way you keep a map of a place you never intend to revisit. Daniel suggested I post something short on my account. Not an attack. Just a few sentences to settle the story from my side. I wrote 6 lines. We were having a small, peaceful wedding surrounded by people who supported our marriage. We wished everyone well. I posted it, closed the app, and didn't look back. Tyler showed up at our apartment door 4 days before the wedding. He knocked 3 times fast, his old way of announcing himself like he still had some claim on my space. I opened the door. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him. Thinner in the face, eyes restless, fingers moving against his leg like he was counting something only he could hear. "I need to come in," he said. I stepped back. He came inside, sat on the couch without being invited, and stared at the floor. He said. "I'm in trouble." "I know, Tyler. Real trouble. The kind that doesn't wait. I can't give you money." He looked up. "I'm not asking for money." That surprised me. "I just need someone to know. In case something happens." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I need someone in the family to know the full picture." So I listened. Not because I had a solution. Not because I could fix anything. But because beneath all the bad decisions and borrowed time, Tyler was still my brother. He was still the person who used to bring me cereal when I was sick and sit at the end of my bed until I fell asleep. I couldn't save him. But I could listen. What Tyler told me that night changed how I understood the last 2 months entirely. My parents hadn't just promised to find the money. They had already borrowed against the house. It wasn't a second mortgage. It was a home equity line of credit, taken out 6 months ago without either of them fully telling the other. My father hadn't disclosed the full amount he'd drawn. My mother had quietly pulled $18,000 from the same line without telling him. Both of them had been drawing from the same shrinking well in secret, each one thinking they were managing a crisis the other couldn't fully see. And Tyler's debt kept climbing the whole time. "So when you said no," Tyler told me, his voice flat and empty, "they had no backup plan. You were the backup plan." I sat with that for a moment. "They're going to lose the house," I said quietly. He looked at me. Probably. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt grief. The quiet kind that arrives when you finally understand the full shape of something and realize it was broken long before your part in it. "Talk to a lawyer," I told him. "For yourself." He nodded. I didn't know if he would, but I said it anyway. 2 nights before the wedding, I woke at 3 in the morning and couldn't get back to sleep. I lay in the dark for an hour, then got up and sat by the window. The city was quiet. One light on across the street in a building I'd looked at 100 times without wondering who lived there. I thought about my parents. Not with anger. With something more like distance. The feeling of looking at something you used to be very close to and realizing how much space has opened between you. I thought about the house they might lose. About Tyler counting days somewhere. About my mother sending messages to relatives, trying to hold a story together that was already falling apart. And I thought about how none of it was mine to carry anymore. That was the strange part. Not the relief. I'd expected relief. What I hadn't expected was the sadness underneath. The grief of fully accepting that the family I had needed and the family I actually had were 2 completely different things. That didn't make me hate them. It made me let go of something I'd held for most of my life. I went back to bed just before 4 and slept until morning. The next day I walked to the bakery on 5th Street and bought myself a pastry for no reason at all. The morning of the wedding I was up before the alarm. I sat in the bathroom with the light off for a few minutes. Not because I was afraid of getting married. I wasn't. Not even slightly. What I felt about Daniel was the kind of settled certainty you stop questioning after a while. I was nervous about the day, the way you get before something that truly matters. I was also waiting for the old fear to arrive. The one that said my parents might find a way to ruin this. It didn't come. Eleanor called at 8 in the morning. I hadn't expected to hear from her today. I just wanted to say, she said, that today belongs entirely to you. Not to anyone else. Whatever happened before today is behind you now. She said it simply. Not like a speech. Just like someone stating a fact that needed to be stated. Thank you, I said. For everything. Don't thank me, she said. Just have a beautiful day. I'll see you this afternoon. I hung up, looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for one long moment, and walked out to get ready for the best day of my life. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. All of it. At 2:15 in the afternoon, I was in the bridal suite at Harlow Gardens when Priscilla knocked on the door. I braced myself without meaning to. She opened the door and said, very calmly, there are 2 people outside who are not on the list. They're asking to be let in. I already knew. It's okay, I told her. Please let them know the venue is at capacity, and that this is a private event. If they have questions, they can reach out to me next week. Priscilla nodded like she'd handled far more difficult requests in her career. Of course. Security will take care of it. Daniel's cousin Ava, standing beside me in her bridesmaid dress, reached over and took my hand without saying a word. Through the window of the suite, at a certain angle, I could just see the front entrance of the venue. My parents were there. My father in a jacket and tie. My mother in the blue dress she wore to every formal occasion. They spoke to a security guard. Then they weren't speaking anymore. Then they were walking back toward the parking area. I watched until they disappeared from view. Then I turned back to the mirror. Okay, I said quietly to myself. And I meant it. The ceremony lasted 22 minutes. 61 people sat in those chairs, every one of them there by genuine choice. I looked at each face during the walk down the aisle and found exactly what I'd hoped for. People who had simply wanted to be there. Eleanor sat in the 3rd row in a soft gray dress, hands folded. When I passed her, she gave one small nod. Like a confirmation. The reception was warm and full of real laughter. Wildflowers on the tables. Good food. Daniel danced badly and happily. I danced with Aunt Sandra, with Brianna, with Carol, who cried a little and then laughed at herself. Eleanor gave the only formal toast. She stood without fanfare, raised her glass, and said, family is not always the people who made you. Sometimes it is the people who see you clearly and choose to stay. Congratulations to 2 people who found each other. The room applauded. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. Later, when the lights dimmed and most guests had gone, I checked my phone for the first time all evening. There was a message from my mother, sent at 9:47 p.m. It said, we should talk about rebuilding. I think we both said things we didn't mean. I set the phone face down on the table. I left it unread. And I went back to dancing.